In late 2024 and early 2025, winter's harsh grip on eastern Ukraine fundamentally transformed the nature of armored warfare as Russian convoys cautiously navigated the treacherous terrain under persistent snow and thick fog that blanketed the region almost continuously. These severe weather conditions, which were once thought to provide a tactical advantage by aiding concealment and limiting the operational capabilities of air support, instead paradoxically exposed Russian armored columns moving slowly along frozen, snow-packed roads to sudden, devastating aerial attacks with minimal warning, drastically changing the operational environment. This development marked a significant tactical shift from the traditional phases of armored movement, previously considered relatively safer moments during which units could reposition with reduced risk, to periods of acute vulnerability, fundamentally altering the calculus of risk associated with armored maneuvers in contested environments. Ukrainian forces swiftly adapted to this new reality by shifting their strategy to aggressively target vehicles in motion, rather than waiting for them to come to a halt, thereby exploiting the limited visibility and reduced crew's situational awareness caused by the persistent snow and dense fog, which severely impaired soldiers' ability to detect incoming threats or coordinate. Ukrainian FPV drones, characterized by their small size, agility, and equipped with advanced multispectral sensors capable of detecting minute heat signatures and electronic emissions, thrived under these challenging conditions, quickly detecting and engaging targets with precision and speed that manned reconnaissance could no longer match. Unlike manned aircraft, which were often grounded or severely hampered by the adverse weather, these unmanned systems could operate effectively and with greater persistence, maintaining relentless pressure on Russian forces and forcing them into a defensive posture. The predictability of movement along narrow, snow-covered roads became a critical liability for the Russian convoys, funneling them into easily exploitable patterns that Ukrainian drones and artillery units could anticipate and strike with devastating effect, often coordinating strikes in near real time through secure digital networks. By striking targets during transit, when crews were primarily focused on navigation and maintaining formation under stressful, low-visibility conditions, Ukrainian forces capitalized on moments when crews were less able to respond to sudden threats, rendering movement itself the riskiest action for Russian armored units and forcing a reconnaissance. This marked a profound shift in the tactical understanding of armored operations, overturning the long-held belief that continuous motion inherently reduced vulnerability. Instead, it became clear that movement now significantly increased exposure and risk, especially in environments dominated by cutting-edge unmanned surveillance and precision strike technologies. This evolution underscored the growing dominance of unmanned systems and advanced sensor technologies in modern armored warfare, demonstrating how environmental factors combined with technological innovation could redefine battlefield dynamics and force a reevaluation of established military doctrines, signaling a new era where adaptability and technological integration became as crucial as firepower and armor. FPV drones fundamentally disrupt traditional battlefield tactics by providing unparalleled detection capabilities that identify any movement through a combination of heat signatures, acoustic signals, and visual cues, factors that are typically absent or minimized in stationary forces attempting to remain concealed. For instance, slow-moving vehicles traveling across snowy terrain inevitably leave behind distinct, fresh snow tracks that serve as a visual breadcrumb trail, revealing not only their precise location, but also their direction of travel, which drone operators can exploit for targeting and tracking purposes. Similarly, the exhaust plumes emitted by these vehicles momentarily pierce through otherwise obscuring conditions, such as fog or smoke, briefly exposing their speed and heading to the ever-watchful FPV drones overhead. These drones do not merely detect movement. They actively loiter at low altitudes, maintaining persistent surveillance over key areas and striking opportunistically when enemy vehicles enter terrain that is naturally vulnerable, such as narrow mountain passes, dense forests, or urban choke points, where escape routes are limited or non-existent. This capability effectively transforms geography and weather conditions into force multipliers for the drone operators, as convoys that might appear to be concealed by dense fog or heavy snowfall are, in reality, already surrounded by a network of drones maintaining continuous visual contact and intelligence, thereby nullifying any advantage of natural. Within such an operational environment, no movement can be considered entirely safe, as harsh winter conditions, instead of removing threats, merely reshape them. Russian units relying heavily on weather for concealment often fall victim to a dangerous false sense of security in the absence of air superiority. While snow and fog might delay detection momentarily, they do not prevent it. And this delay can have fatal consequences when drones exploit the brief windows of visibility to relay critical targeting information and coordinate strikes. Once movement is detected, Ukrainian forces strategically prioritize targeting supply vehicles over heavily armored tanks, understanding that trucks and other logistics vehicles, those carrying ammunition, infantry fighting vehicles, FVs, laden with supplies, or armored personnel carriers, APCs, ferrying troops, are the lifeblood of combat units. Destroying these logistics vehicles has a cascading effect. Combat units quickly collapse as armored vehicles cannot sustain fighting capabilities without the continuous flow of ammunition, fuel, and personnel. By striking supply lines early and decisively, Ukrainian forces achieve functional paralysis of Russian combat operations, rather than seeking total annihilation, which would be far more resource-intensive and time-consuming. Infantry and APC crews, suddenly finding their resupply routes cut off, are forced into operational pauses that make them significantly easier targets for persistent drone strikes. Furthermore, focusing on logistics creates additional battlefield effects, such as congestion and confusion within enemy ranks, prolonging exposure to drone attacks and enabling a sustained campaign of attrition that disrupts the enemy's operational tempo and degrades their overall combat effectiveness. This multi-layered approach to targeting not only maximizes the strategic advantage provided by FPV drones, but also exemplifies how modern warfare increasingly relies on the integration of technology, terrain, and tactical ingenuity to overcome traditionally formidable. A single successful strike can immobilize an entire movement corridor for hours, even if only one vehicle is destroyed, demonstrating how precision targeting can have outsized strategic impacts far beyond the immediate loss. Unlike a tank, which, though formidable, can often be replaced or bypassed by maneuvering forces, a disrupted resupply system impacts every nearby unit simultaneously, creating a cascading effect that paralyzes operational capabilities across an entire sector. Ukrainian forces, understanding this dynamic deeply, prioritize logistics vehicles as critical pressure points within the enemy's supply chain, carefully selecting moments when their loss will inflict the greatest operational damage and force a ripple of disruption throughout the opposing force. The goal is not merely the destruction of vehicles, but achieving tangible results, halted advances rather than just destroyed hardware, recognizing that the true value lies in stopping momentum and buying time. Many Russian attacks falter soon after initial contact, not primarily due to superior firepower or tactical mistakes, but because units lack the sustained momentum necessary for offensive operations, often running short on ammunition needed to suppress defenses effectively or support continuous movement. Often running short on ammunition needed to suppress defense. Faced with this dilemma, commanders must either pause and risk casualties by remaining exposed or withdraw and regroup, thereby losing the momentum that is arguably the most valuable asset in any offensive operation. This pattern of disruption and loss of momentum repeats across regions and under varying environmental conditions, revealing a deliberate and sophisticated strategy. Systematically depleting enemy ammunition stocks before decisive engagements to reshape the battlefield early in a campaign. As a result, advances come to a halt, defensive lines hold firm despite resource constraints, and valuable time is gained to adapt and reinforce. The battle, therefore, shifts from brute strength and attrition to a war of supply and logistics, where smaller, cheaper systems, like drones, deliver disproportionately large effects. Ukrainian FPV drone attacks exemplify this shift. They are not random acts of harassment, but a carefully layered process that leaves enemy crews little chance to react or recover. This repeatable method transforms relatively small drones into a coordinated, integrated system that mirrors modern military thinking but employs simpler, more cost-effective tools. The process begins with reconnaissance, using drones to confirm and precisely time targets by analyzing movement patterns rather than simply fixed positions, ensuring maximum disruption. Then the first FPV drone strikes to disable mobility, components such as engines or tracks, forcing vehicle columns to slow dramatically or stop altogether. In challenging winter terrain, a single immobilized vehicle can block a narrow road, turning previously advantageous mobility into a critical liability. Finally, follow-up drones attack vulnerable points like ammunition compartments or turret rings, causing catastrophic damage that extends beyond the initial strike and further degrades the enemy's capacity to regroup or mount counterattacks. This multi-stage approach effectively leverages a combination of tactical patience, precision technology, and an understanding of the operational environment to create a force multiplier effect that dramatically amplifies the impact of each individual strike. The final attacks are meticulously executed because the advantage lies firmly with the operator, not the target, creating a situation where the attackers can dictate the tempo and outcome with near impunity. Crews under attack find themselves with very few viable options, hampered by poor visibility conditions, often exacerbated by smoke, dust, or darkness, and an almost negligible chance to escape unscathed. This layered tactic effectively strips away their usual decisions and tactical flexibility. They cannot simply drive away due to the speed and persistence of the threat. Returning fire is largely ineffective against fast-moving, small-profile drones capable of rapid course adjustments, and leaving vehicles exposes them to direct observation and subsequent targeting, which can be fatal. Many crews remain inside their vehicles until the final strike occurs, not out of indecision or hesitation, but because no safe alternative exists, effectively trapping them in a deadly cage that closes swiftly once detected. This method closely mirrors the kill chain concept: find, fix, finish, but it is compressed into the actions of a single highly coordinated team leveraging readily available commercial technology. Detection, targeting, and destruction now happen within minutes or even seconds, all at a fraction of the cost and complexity traditionally associated with such operations. This paradigm shift demonstrates that while the fundamental principles of modern warfare remain intact, the barriers to effectively applying them have largely vanished, democratizing precision strike capabilities. Precision, coordination, and timing, which were once the exclusive domain of large military organizations equipped with extensive resources, are now accessible to much smaller forces through the use of FPV, first-person view, drones. This technology enables just a few operators to deliver effects that previously required entire battalions supported by air power and complex command structures. Psychologically, the impact on crews is profound. They quickly learn that surviving the initial strike is only a temporary reprieve, as follow-up attacks are almost guaranteed, which in turn alters their behavior, induces caution, and slows operational advances. Russian forces have attempted to adapt to this evolving threat environment, notably by deploying unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, to reduce risk to personnel and maintain operational tempo. However, these UGVs tend to be slow and predictable in their movement patterns, lacking active defenses such as counter-drone systems or stealth capabilities, which renders them highly vulnerable to detection and destruction by drones. The destruction of a UGV is doubly detrimental, as it not only results in the loss of the vehicle itself, but also often includes critical supplies and equipment, compounding the operational setbacks. Numerous videos and combat footage vividly illustrate how quickly UGVs are identified and neutralized with their thermal signatures and repetitive movement behaviors, making them easy targets for precise, swift attacks, highlighting the ongoing challenge of integrating unmanned systems into contested environments without adequate protective measures. In many cases, unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, failed to reach their intended destinations, turning what were supposed to be straightforward resupply missions into outright failures, severely impacting operational momentum. Russian forces continued relying heavily on traditional concealment methods, using terrain features like hills and dense forest edges, weather conditions such as fog and snow, and creating artificial smoke screens to hide their movement from enemy observation. These tactics had proven effective in past conflicts where sensor technology was rudimentary and response times were slower, effectively creating observation gaps that allowed forces to move with relative impunity. However, the modern battlefield has changed drastically. Those observation gaps have now largely vanished because contemporary UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, can patiently loiter in the skies, waiting for the slightest sign of movement before revealing hidden vehicles. Fog, once a natural shield, now only delays inevitable detection. Snow, rather than concealing tracks, often highlights them against the landscape, and smoke, intended to obscure, frequently signals the presence of activity and draws attention instead. First-person view, FPV drones in particular, hover persistently near key routes and choke points, undermining camouflage efforts by maintaining continuous real-time observation and relaying precise targeting data. Recent battlefield data indicates that vehicle losses most often occur during movements conducted under weather cover in narrow terrain corridors, where the predictability of routes makes them prime targets for ambushes and precision strikes. Crucially, the problem is not one of technological failure. Russian forces possess capable drones and sensors, but rather a failure to adapt doctrinally, treating drones as temporary nuisances rather than acknowledging their permanent and transformative role in modern warfare. Without establishing some form of airspace control, ground forces remain exposed and vulnerable to persistent UAV surveillance and strikes, while failed attempts to adapt tactics and equipment only waste precious resources and manpower. Moreover, the battlefield now extends far beyond the traditional front lines. Ukrainian UAVs routinely strike deep into rear areas, targeting critical infrastructure such as supply depots, staging zones, and transportation junctions. These attacks disrupt logistics and force the enemy to divert attention and resources away from frontline combat. Vehicles destroyed several kilometers behind the front stall offensive operations. Delay or fragment formation movements, and deprive commanders of essential coordination capabilities. Consequently, units arrive late, under strength, or not at all, effectively halting support to frontline elements and weakening the overall combat effectiveness of Russian forces. This new reality underscores the urgent need for doctrinal innovation and integrated air-ground defense systems to counter the pervasive influence of UAVs on modern military operations. Supply points once secure for frontline use are now vulnerable to persistent drone surveillance and attacks, forcing Russian forces to reroute logistics through longer, riskier paths that increase travel time, fuel use, and exposure to aerial threats. Supply lines have shifted from secure lifelines into prime targets for small drones, capable of precise strikes and reconnaissance, changing the battlefield focus from destroying enemy drones to managing constant aerial surveillance and interdiction. Ukrainian soldiers adapted quickly by detecting stealthy FPV drones operating at low power to avoid radar, responding with coordinated infantry tactics and integrated air defense rather than panic, showing that UAVs are manageable tactical challenges, requiring situational awareness and discipline. Drone operations now demand operator skill, timing, and coordination with ground units. As the idea of a safe rear area has vanished, observation and engagement cover the entire battlefield, slowing movements, complicating logistics, and forcing commanders to rethink protection and movement doctrine. Success favors those who maintain persistent surveillance, adapt rapidly, and integrate unmanned systems into combined arms efforts, making drone warfare a contest of endurance, innovation, and information dominance rather than sheer firepower. Ukraine's use of surveillance and strike drones, heightened ground awareness, and agile command structures forms a flexible system countering Russian surprise maneuvers. When supply routes become too dangerous, alternatives or tactical changes are swiftly chosen, rendering static defenses ineffective and emphasizing disruption through timing, deception, and information superiority over raw firepower. The contest increasingly depends on relentless pressure across dispersed areas, highlighting airspace dominance via unmanned systems over traditional armor and artillery. Russian armored units struggle as supply lines are cut and rear areas unsafe, stalling advances and reshaping doctrines to prioritize survivability in surveilled environments. For U.S. planners, this evolution challenges doctrines based on rapid movement, massed firepower, and secure rear areas, showing that constant aerial visibility, targeted disruption, and networked unmanned assets can undermine conventional forces. Ukraine's experience warns Moscow and global observers that future ground combat will be defined by unmanned systems, networked warfare, and information control, marking a shift where adaptability, technology integration, and real-time awareness decide victory or defeat. This shift also highlights the vital role of electronic warfare and cyber capabilities, as controlling the electromagnetic spectrum is crucial for protecting drone operations and disrupting enemy networks. Integrating AI and machine learning to process vast sensor data helps commanders make faster, informed decisions, turning raw information into actionable intelligence. As unmanned systems proliferate, future conflicts will demand not only physical resilience, but also digital and cognitive agility, fundamentally transforming the battlefield landscape.